Right, let's get started then. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Thanks all of you who've been to my webinars before and are coming back. I'm just fresh back from SSP, where I had the pleasure of meeting with Michael and Nicole in person, which was lovely. Unfortunately, I caught COVID on the way back, which is why my voice is a bit gone. And if I start a sentence that doesn't make any sense, it's probably to do with the fog. Today we're here for a panel webinar, the author journey Redefined, where we'll talk about article workflows and how we can make things better and what obstacles they are, and also talk a little bit about collaboration and integrations between different vendors. So I've got a stellar panel cast here with me today: Michael Cast from J&J Editorial, Kate Horgan from Aries, and Nicole Brown from Silverchair. So those of you that are new to the webinars, the setup is that we'll do very short presentations each, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion around the topic in question. And there's also a chance for you to ask questions. Please feel free to put them either in the chat or the Q&A at any point, and we'll weave them into discussion as we see fit. And if we don't get to your questions, we'll respond by email later on. I said the webinar is being recorded, so no need to make too many notes or anything, and you can look at the recording at a later date. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Michael, who will start us off.
All right, here we go, requesting control. I think we're good. Hi, everyone. So yeah, thanks, Romy, for inviting me to this panel.
You might have to request it again.
Oh,
right, there you go.
There we go. Okay, I think it's working now, hopefully. Well, thanks all. So yes, I'm Michael Cast from J&J Editorial, which is part of Wiley Partner Solutions. So I'm going to be talking about workflow, because that's what we deal with at J&J a lot, is sort of submission through production. So that's what we'll be talking about. So in the digital age that we're in, everybody is always thinking about speed, and what we do in publishing is no exception. People expect things to happen instantly, but we know that it's not that easy. However, the components needed to create a really efficient and rapid workflow, like, they exist. They need to be configured together in logical ways, and I think that's the point that sort of our industry is in. And I know Wiley Partner Solutions is working on this. Here's all the sort of our brethren and sister-in companies that we work alongside. I came in with J&J Editorial, where I've been for a decade, working up and down the publishing chain, doing direct support for peer review and production. So here is your basic publishing workflow. Delay. There we go. Slides trying to change. Well, anyways, so I'm going to be talking about, as I said, submission through publishing. And whoops, I clicked too many times. Hang on. There's a bit of a delay, so anyways, well, you're getting a preview. So you can think about the publishing workflow as a line, or we kind of started thinking about it as a wheel, like a flywheel even, because the end of the workflow really starts supporting the beginning of the next stage of the workflow. So or the beginning of the workflow rather. So on the submission side, I'd say ways to increase speed, and just increase the speed that the wheel spins, starting with policies. I always start there, making them clear, consistent across journal portfolios if possible. And then you have to communicate those, and that I think that's where a lot of breakdowns happen, is that clear communication with authors. I've seen a lot of instructions for authors. They're difficult. In an ideal world, publishers would collectively, if publishers could collectively get around consistent submission standards, that's another way that we could just increase speed overall. That's probably never going to happen, but What we have started seeing is automation and other processes allowing things like format-free submission. So authors don't have to do a lot of pre-work on their manuscripts to get it into some kind of journal format for peer review. Journals, either they have automated scripts that can, reformat the manuscript, or they can just take it as is. Also, just automating article ingest at the submission point is always useful for authors, not having to rekey metadata, because that is one of the things that they're consistently complaining about, and I understand. Other advancements that can help with submission and all the way through are things like persistent identifiers. I'm going to evangelize persistent identifiers because it really is the key to unlocking a lot of speed and just simplicity in our workflows. So Orchid, Ringgold, Roar, Grant, all of that would be useful in our workflows. But the key here also, beyond adoption, is making sure all the vendors, all the publishers are actually passing those identifiers along throughout the publishing chain, because I think there's a lot of times they just kind of get lost somewhere or another. I will say in the peer review component of the workflow, we're running into a lot of bottlenecks. The growth of submitted content is really outpacing the number of expert reviewers available. So any researcher will tell you they get 1,000 requests to review things every day. So there's just never enough reviewers. Editors are always having trouble looking for them. So one of the approaches that we're seeing people try is editors using algorithms, sometimes AI, to find new reviewers that they wouldn't find otherwise, then people they don't know, getting them outside of their sort of network. So these tools, I hear mixed reviews. They work better in some fields than others. But I do think that's an area for growth. At J&J, a lot of times what we're doing is supporting editors in just figuring out how to queue reviewer invites and things like that, or when they do secure reviewers, just helping remind reviewers that they did agree. And of course, there's always the simple matter of you got to have a strategy to deal with system generated emails going to spam folders. So like that's just, I can't tell you how many days I've lost in a workflow just from it went to spam and they didn't realize it. Now it's 3 days later. So that's something you have to keep an eye on for these sort of system review requests, because spam filters are getting just increasingly aggressive. On the production side, and this is sort of one of my main areas of focus. So we've seen a ton of increases in speed over the last decade. Production can be quite mechanical and ideally should be very mechanical. So it lends itself well to computer automation. There's technologies now that can, with a reasonable degree of accuracy, convert a Word document, manuscript file, or an export from a peer review system into an XML version of the manuscript. We centered around a good standard like JATS, the Journal Article Tag Suite. And once an article is converted to JATS, or any machine readable format, but hopefully you're using JATS, content can then be manipulated by software, put in layouts for PDF, converted to EPUB, HTML, etc. So one of the other things that people are starting to do with these XML versions is using them as sort of the back end of the proof. So there are these cloud proofing platforms where an author will log in to their browser, find a version of their article as the proof, and they can make their marks on there, make their edits and stuff, and staff can do the same. And these edits are actually translating and connected directly to the underlying article XML. So that just saves some of the messiness of dealing with PDF markup, essentially, because that just takes time. There's errors can creep in because sometimes it's a manual process. So On the sort of open access processing, APC payment, transformational agreement coverage, copyright licensing, like these are all items that can slow a paper down, which means it's an opportunity for speed. Payment options that provide, improved payment flows, copyright licensing, make that a little bit easier. Great spots to improve the process. And ideally, in an ideal world, authors would not be saddled with, making a lot of administrative decisions around OA payments, and could rely on their institutions or funders to handle this for them. And this is one of the promises of transformative agreements, where, institutions pre-agree payment arrangements or what have you with publishers. So they have sort of this OA relationship, and that authors just have to identify themselves as a member of that institution to get their APC covered. And there are, a few software solutions that are in the mix helping that happen, automating some of this administrative work. And actually, last week at SSP, I saw a great panel about just like user experience in OA, and the piece that I found really interesting. So there's this point, authors get to where they have to select their Creative Commons license, and they are not copyright lawyers, so it's a difficult struggle. If anyone's ever spent, an hour just trying to parse, like, what are the different licenses means, CC BY, what? You'll understand like the struggle here. But if the panel made a great point and showed some examples of, like, if you just lay out this information in a more like user-friendly way, that just makes life easier for the author. They'll be able to make this decision more quickly, and they'll get less frustrated and not have to read a whole bunch of Creative Commons documentation. 'Cause that's, I mean, it's fun for me because I like that stuff, but I don't think most people are into that. So now for sort of the display end, so the actual publication, we're sending it out to the world stage of the workflow. So this has also seen a lot of speed and functionality increases thanks to XML, because this is tightly aligned with sort of the production process. There's a lot of sort of instant sort of passing of information, passing data, to the point where, like, your website display platform can often just ingest whatever's coming out of production, and just put it up on the site with little to no human interaction. They'll generate the web pages automatically. A lot of these platforms will then send metadata and other things to indexes, databases like PubMed, Web of Science, things like that, so that content can be searchable and discoverable for your readers. Platforms, they're also getting better about like grouping content into collections, topics, issues, and delivering custom messaging or content to researchers based on their reading habits. Here's an article you might enjoy. Things like that are starting to get useful for authors, I think. So updating your workflow, implementing tools, transitioning platforms, like this is difficult work. It's complicated, and more importantly, it takes a lot of time. So this is something where J&J gets brought into frequently. It's just to provide that extra support when you need it, sort of a change management function for publishers. Sometimes it's figuring out, here's the best practice, here's the sort of ways we've seen it work well, and also sometimes it's just like you just need extra hands on the project when you're making these big changes. So there it is, your 38-point plan to improve workflow speed. And my final point is that as we approach the limits of automation, I think it'll become clear that the slowest parts are going to be the humans involved. So it's really important to keep the focus on that human interaction interface point. User experience is just paramount, as is making these systems really accessible. Accessibility and UX, they often go hand in hand. So if we can make these systems usable by larger numbers of people, we're likely to see further increases in speed. So thank you, and I'll pass it off to, I think Romy's next, right?
Thanks so much, Michael. So you had some problems with moving the slides. I think it was my internet wasn't great, so I've relocated and I think it's been resolved. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I loved your point about the emails going into spam folder. You know, we build all these amazing things, and then this is where it sometimes fails, and you have to call people up or message them, did you get my email? But it's such a good pain point. I mean, I totally agree with that. But for also all sorts of communication, not just in the article workflow, right? But that really, really resonated. And so thanks for that, and thanks for a great overview. So I'm going to dig in a little bit into the element of speed, particular for the kind of OA processing element, and share some numbers with you, and also share some general kind of tips for improving workflows. And I'm also really resonated with what you said in terms of good user experience will drive speed. If it's really easy to see what the license options are or to do things, then some things will happen quicker. Obviously, it doesn't apply to all aspects of the workflow. So we did a webinar earlier in the year about author experience, and I just wanted to bring this slide back because I think it covers quite a lot of the different steps. And some of them can be resolved by systems and tools and platforms, and others are still very manual or involve like direct engagement or emails or information that's put on a website. But what we talk about when we talk about author experience is really any kind of engagement, and all this webinar is more focused on article workflow. I think there's a really close link between the two, and how you can make things easier, and that makes the article move quicker as well for certain aspects of the workflow anyway. And like I said, in terms of platform experience, that does cover some things, and we'll dig a little bit more in the discussion about that, how different platforms like Chronos Hub, like the tools that J&J works with, and Silverchair and the Aries products, how work together and can be integrated to create that kind of smooth journey with whatever tools you choose to use, really. So as I said, I'll focus a little bit more on the kind of post-acceptance processing. So you talked us through things like submission, peer review, a production publication. I know that Kate will dig into as well. So what we did, we looked at some of the numbers, because originally this webinar was going to be all about speed, and we tried to get some numbers, like what's the quickest way that an article goes through the whole flow. And I know that was difficult to get hands on for everybody. So we looked at measurements for some of the publishers that are live on our platform, and try to see how long it takes to get through each of the steps. And I want to take a minute to talk about that. So what the steps that we counted in this is from logging into the platform, doing the agreement eligibility check to see if an article is eligible for, say, a transformative agreement, a read and publish agreement, then choosing your publishing option, whether you want to publish openly or closed, and then signing the correct license, and then paying for any charges. So the quickest we measured there is 2 minutes 20. I believe that was a case with a credit card payment, so there was no issue of requesting an invoice. But as you can see, the average is 40 minutes, and there's quite a big difference in that. And it's quite interesting when you start looking at the outliers, because for some people it's really important to read the whole agreement, or they need to go and find the credit card or go and figure out who they need to invoice. So although I think it can be an indication of success how quickly things move, it can also be difficult to measure it on that, because there's all these outliers, and it's quite hard to say, well, this was definitely successful because it's quick. But perhaps in other cases, it is important to take your time and to do some things a little bit slower. But as you were saying, Michael, I think a lot of things through automation can be reduced at least to like minutes instead of days. When you think about some elements of that workflow, like emailing license agreements, rather than doing it online. Another way that you can think about measuring user success is through like things like NPS score at various points of the article workflow, to see how that resonates with your authors and users of the platform. So next, let me share like my 5 tips on a better author experience through improved workflows, and I'm looking forward to hearing back from you guys if you agree with these or not. So the first one that I came up with is one login. As we know, like publishers like to use different platforms and different services from across the range of vendors, but I think the best workflow experience is really if the logins can be combined or can be linked in a really seamless way, so that, you know, when you do your login, you don't have to have multiple user names and passwords. You don't have to log into a completely different platform but it should all be seamlessly integrated. Despite using underlying systems, I think that will make things like article workflow a lot quicker as well as improve the author experience. Next up, manual versus automation. So I don't really want to say one is better than the other. As you said, Michael, some elements are manual, and that's just where things slow down if there's a human element, but there's a reason it should be manual, and we need to look at it with human eyes. And you can't automate everything. I just want people to think about, when they think about their workflow, what are the elements that are automated, and does it make sense, and can they be customized so they're not just blasted with the email, everyone's blasted with the same email, but you need to think about it in context, and making sure that's adjusted for each author if possible. And equally, are there manual processes that you could automate because it's slowing things down, while keeping those that really need to be manual in that way, but making them perhaps more efficient and using AI tools to help that manual step. So that's more of a thought there. In terms of workflow sequence, one of the top tips here is that you think, publishers that think about their article workflow and how they can possibly improve that need to really map the whole process out and look at which elements occur when in the step, because I think there's some elements that certainly my experience in talking to publishers, I know that some publishers do at different stages of the workflow. For example, something like signing the publishing agreement. I know some publishers do this during submission, others do it during peer review, others do it post-acceptance. Or then having issues with having to redo it again later if there's a change of, for example, I changed my mind, I want to publish open access after all. So I think if you want to improve your workflows, that's one thing that everyone should be doing, really mapping it out, what element happens when, and are there things that aren't quite logical and that could be adjusted a little bit. And next is really keeping it simple. The example I gave here is of the precursor to Instagram, Bourbon, was very complicated, had lots of features and nobody was using it. And once they took all that away and really simplified it, it took off and got millions of users overnight. And I think there's a learning point in there, and there's a lot of elements still that can be simplified. If you think about different steps, where I think specifically editors like to request lots and lots of different elements of lots of information, lots of questions, because we need to gather this information, we need to gather that information. But when we purely think about the workflow of the article, I think there's some learnings there to say, well, what do we really need? Can we keep it simpler to make it a bit leaner and to make it quicker and more efficient going forward? And lastly, I think there's still a long way to go with using tools like AI and doing more for the author to make the article go through the workflow quicker, with things like you talked about as well, Michael, AI extraction of metadata, so the author doesn't have to enter it themselves, and lots of different steps along the way. So I think there's I'd like to see more improvements there, generally speaking. And that's everything from me. I'll hand over to Kate, who will dig into a little bit more into editorial and production.
Great, thank you. So I've just gotten access, great. So I'm going to be handling the editorial and production workflows sections. So I will start with the editorial side. And our products are editorial manager and production manager by their names. I'm sure that you can figure that editorial manager handles the peer review process portion, and production manager picks up for accepted contents and shepherds and tracks the way from that initially accepted content all the way to handing off to Nicole and platforms like Silverchair. And where they get posted. So I'm going to start with the editorial side. And again, there's going to be a theme, a human element, which is that I think our greatest opportunity to improve the author experience is actually taking a look at that point where editors are reaching out to reviewers and their reviewer engagement. Because while we can have plenty of tools that can support us and automate up until that point, we are still reliant on those humans interacting with the content and giving their expertise to engage. So I do have some thoughts, and I'm picking up a little bit more on what Michael mentioned, which is the peer review process and the amount of submitted content that requires peer review. And I think really having the conversation around what can we do to boost reviewer engagement in a positive way. And there's really three key areas that I think we can focus on, which is the quality or value of the peer review, the quantity of peer reviews that a peer reviewer submits or engages in, and then how can we increase a desire to peer review overall and feel as though reviewers want to engage in that process, and what can we do to support that? So some questions around that is, who really determines value? Who are we looking at to see, is the content or reviewer's engagement adding the quality? And there is some research that out there that suggests that, interestingly, from an author perspective, seniority does not necessarily translate to greater value from their seat. We found that in that research that authors actually responded that sometimes more junior reviewers, because they had more time, they were focused on the review, maybe in a slightly different way. They were wanting to engage because it was one of the first times they've been asked to review, provided greater insights for the author. Conversely, from an editor perspective, there was no measurable, according to this research, correlation between junior and senior. It was kind of a mixed bag from an editor perspective when evaluating the value of that content. When we talk about time, so is there a greater quality in research for the amount of time a reviewer spends? It is no. The more time someone spends does not equate to greater value. In fact, 3 hours was found to be the ideal kind of amount of time, and then it peters off from there. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, that more does not necessarily mean better. Quantity. What's the right number of reviews? And there's less research in this area, but there is an article out there that suggests that because the average across multidisciplines, number of reviews requested is 3, that every first and or senior author should then contribute 3 reviews. So if an author submits 3 papers annually, they would be expected to submit 9 peer reviews of other content to kind of equal out that process. And it's something worth thinking about when you're thinking about the third bucket, which is the desire to review. What can you do to incentivize reviewers? Having some of those metrics in place and having reward mechanisms in place to note what good engagement looks like in both of those areas and publicly recognize them is really important in making sure you have the right metrics. I know there's some conversation around payment, and I think that that's very common. Is when we think about value, we tend to immediately go to money. But within the academic space, is that the only option? Within academics, there's things like reputation and recognition and success. So are there ways in which you can reward or recognize your reviewers in a meaningful way that helps them build their career and build their profile that might also help in that space? So a couple of things to consider. And the reality is that you likely want all 3. Every publisher is going to kind of live on a spectrum. So they may need to spend more time looking at quantity over quality because they're comfortable with that. But striking the right balance between the 3 and finding out what it is for you is certainly a way in which you can ultimately help your authors. And the reason that this has to do with author engagement is because I think it's really easy for us in the peer review portion to just think of there's authors, reviewers, and then editors, as if they're 3 completely different people. And the reality is they're all researchers. Researchers are authors and reviewers and editors. So to have a positive experience as a reviewer and to get positive quality engagement from your publisher in the support of the creation of that peer review and to receive that as an author ultimately benefits authors when they're putting on their hat as an author from being a reviewer. They can trust the quality, and ultimately we cannot think of these as 3 different people. It's one person who's navigating 3 different roles. So caring for the human element within the peer review process will ultimately benefit the authorship as well. So one open question I have, and I have a lot of thoughts on this, is in a world of vendors, tools, and services, how can we ensure that we're partnering effectively? And is this a situation where good fences make good neighbors, where there's tools that work, but we need to have boundaries around how they're used? And from my seat, I think that Michael touched on several where I think there are tools where you can effectively set them and forget them. So yes, we should have reference checking tools and just have that be to support our authors. But when we start getting to in spaces like integrity in research, whether that be the content that's submitted or the way in which an author is engaging, I would say that we should use tools as signals, but ultimately as publishers, and as vendors, we need to own the ultimate end result of upholding integrity. So I think there's a spectrum when we're talking about tools, and I don't think that it makes sense for us to treat all tools with the same light. And just being mindful of when we say, oh, AI could do that, you know, what are we really asking it to do, and what responsibility might we be putting on a tool that may not be mature enough to handle that quite yet. So just something to think about. Which leads me to the production side of the workflow. So for production manager, my answer is tools. Production is all about speed and efficiency and time to publication. So production has to balance so many things. So speed, accuracy, fidelity to the originally accepted content, all of those things need to remain through a variety of handover points with a variety of different vendors and the author. And what that looks like today for a lot of times is that someone like a production editor or comparable role is the hub of managing a lot of these different touch points and having the responsibility of ensuring that when an author makes changes, that that's the version that's incorporated before it gets sent to another vendor to be manipulated. And oh, wait, we need to go back to a copy editor. There's a lot of manual process that happens in that, and a lot of time, frankly, that gets lost in those interchanges. So we believe that the future is in creating tools that alleviate that that burden, frankly, of that exchange, and focusing on XML and automatic conversion, formatting and creation of that document, so that all of those various vendors, including the production editor, can be removed from the center and can work with that single source of truth document in a user-friendly interface where under the hood, underneath, the XML is automatically updated as changes are made. And so regardless of if you're working with a globally distributed team or a team that is on site, you can be sure that that is all happening automatically and everyone has access to the most up-to-date content. And that's a really good example of where we can, you know, trust but verify, of course, that those tools are kind of set and forget and then go, and trust that they're happening. And that's ultimately the goal that, again, Michael mentioned before, that we really do want to start relying on those tools going forward. And then to bring it full circle, the flywheel that Michael mentioned before, I do want to bring it back to editorial, which is there's always been this fairly firm wall between editorial and production. And, you know, what happens on one side has nothing to do with the other side, and they all have their own kind of process. Both technically and by policy. And those walls seem to be crumbling now. There are a lot of production tools that could lead to editorial efficiencies. And if we bring them closer to the editorial process and bring them up front, are we actually benefiting those authors and reviewers and editors by leveraging those tools early? And ultimately creating that fidelity and consistency between what was submitted and what exists within the peer review system, and ensuring that alignment. So what opportunities do we have to bring down those walls even further and bring some of those practices forward in the workflow? So thank you very much. I will be turning it over to Nicole now.
Thank you. I will take over control. Okay, I think I'm good to go. All right, well, thank you again, Kate, and thank you, Romy, for having me on the panel today. I'm Nicole Brown, the Director of Customer Success at Silverchair, and you'll see that I kept a little bit with the racing and kind of speed theme that Romy mentioned when I got up to speed on the topic today, that I kind of was able to understand the background and the context of where the presentation was coming from. So I'm going to be talking about where the platform sits in the process of publication and feeling like the finish line, and what platforms can do to amplify content further. Okay, so really quick, Silverchair is a platform partner for publishers in the scholarly and publishing community. We build and host websites for online products and digital content libraries Through our partnerships and through our technology, we expand the reach of the world's valuable knowledge by connecting creators, publishers, and users to amplify the impact of scholarship. So when I think about what my colleagues have talked about today, we're talking more upstream in the process, and platform sits a bit downstream, but a bit upstream from when we talk about branding, marketing, or productizing and institutional sales. Platform is leveraged once the content is packaged to publish and validate and enriches it. It enables the publishers to push the content to digital collections and create the productized experience for the user, for the user's consumption, and then for later the marketing team and sales team to go and sell to the institutions. Publishers are able to utilize a platform like Silverchair for automated alerting, content marketing, and analytics to identify user behaviors and needs. So when we think about accelerating the author process, platforms like Silverchair support publishers by leveraging vendor partnerships like Silverchair's Universe Partners. Platforms must be built to be integrated with. So we talked a lot about earlier in the presentation about integrations and where we can gain leverage and traction from those. And a platform is kind of a core piece to that. We have to be able to integrated with in terms of inbound content integrations like a content ingestion API, or outbound integrations like metadata syndication and deposits to search and discovery systems. For example, one of our Universe partners here at Silverchair is the Data Conversion Laboratory, DCL, and by partnering with them, they've become really proficient in our content specification, which makes publishers who kind of come to our platform or migrate to us able to work with them and be able to have a quicker content conversion experience to get that content live to the site. This slide is heavy with pictures, so that might be why we're seeing a blank slide. But it was just a bunch of visuals of an article published. And basically thinking back to where we started, the finish line. So the manuscript is published, we've hit the finish line. Now it's time for the celebration. The author's excited, publisher's excited. So while the publisher is off, oh, there we go. Thanks, Romy. I didn't realize I put fancy pop-ups in this. So while the publisher and the author are off doing kind of the press photos, it's the platform's responsibility to amplify the content. So a platform like Silverchair utilizes a set of standards we've talked about earlier in the presentation. Michael and Kate talked about utilizing industry standards to achieving a lot of efficiency. So platforms can utilize a set of standards to achieve scalable design and solutions so that we're able to be best in class in areas of non-functional requirements, the things that the publishers really shouldn't have to think about, that the platform should own. They should not be noisy. They're not often fun or sexy to talk about, but they are really important to the end user experience and the consumption of the content. So maintaining a standard content specification allows platforms to implement solutions that support strict reliability, scalability, performance guarantees. Users want content quickly, and as we're coming out of a COVID era where we recognize now more than ever the importance of getting research into users' hands and into the world, to improve health outcomes, that speed is incredibly important. Standardized content specifications allow platforms to implement enhancements to content in a way that benefits all publishers while also supporting community initiatives. So when we think about support for ROR IDs, Silverchair, for example, is able to update our content specification in a way that allows all of our publishers to take advantage of that functionality. And by including ROR IDs in the content, you're able to deposit that content downstream by the institution or by that key identifier. And then on the back end, you can utilize tools for analytics to identify how many articles are being published related to that institution and that ID. Similar with ORCID IDs. So a scalable infrastructure and content data architecture ensure that metadata is identified correctly throughout the article's publication streams, thinking about on the page, downstream services, and front-end access indicators like we've talked about earlier. Platforms are able to adhere to SEO best practices. So we think about discoverability. Again, some of those kind of back-end things that were on the front end of the publisher you're not thinking of are the URL generation, the sitemaps, the canonical URLs that the crawlers are looking at to ingest so that your users are getting direct access to the content they're looking for without having to jump through multiple hoops to get there. Things like the page meta title, again, in the HTML and the meta description. Those are things that crawlers are using to ingest the content, understand what the purpose of the content meets, and then that's how they're using it to rank it when a user is searching in Google. Platforms are meant to be easy to integrate with. So we think about discovery services at scale. Silverchair and other platforms are able to invest in an integration one time and have it be leveraged by all of the publishers within their community. And once an article is live, it's not only discoverable on the publication site, it's also available in Google, Google Scholar, PubMed almost instantaneously. And thinking about all of that, we're able to track all of the user's activity and the viewership of the content and report that back not only to the publisher, but directly to the author and the reader through cited by widgets and article level metrics. So, in thinking about accelerating the audience, how do we get the users to consume the content and start driving up that usage, again, to kind of improve the overall health outcomes? We think about offsite discoverability services that we're familiar with to platforms with unique features and functionality that enable user engagement, like new content widgets, related content widgets. So allowing an author to say that this content is also related to this other content, or a publisher to say that as well, is really beneficial. And it also creates a user experience where the user wants to stay within the publication and consume more research through the publisher. Personalized content widgets. Michael, I think you talked about this earlier, right? It encourages users to stay within the content too by providing them recommendations based on things that they're interested in. And through first party and zero party affinities, we're able to allow the user to identify what they're interested in, and then also understand based on what they're consuming, what else might be relevant that they're not necessarily highlighting. Platforms are able to leverage tooling to push publication-driven alerts, meaning when the content goes live, your users are notified. The content is out there, it's right in their hands, and it's available for them to access. Further supporting the authors, one of the things that Silverchair has automated is an alert that goes straight to the author upon publication. And we're able to provide them, if it is a paywalled article, the email that goes to them is designed by the publisher. So it has a personal touch, but it's automated. So it takes some of the administrative overhead off of the publisher's team. And it's able to give the author direct access. So if they don't have access wherever they are, whatever they get in that email, they're able to see their article published on the site, share it out to friends. And it's definitely a feeling of reward. So lastly, thinking about a platform, a successful platform puts the tools in the hands of the publisher. So clients of all sizes benefit from a robust suite of self-serve site management tools. From enabling the tools for the actual content publication and making that streamlined and efficient, allowing them to preview it so they can see what it's going to look like before it goes live, to modifying the actual site and the instance of the widgets that's going to display that content and how it caters to the end users, to web editing and creating marketing splash pages. Putting that all in the hands of the tool of the publishers really streamlines things while having the platform kind of own the technology. The tools empower publishers to manage all relevant activities on their own and in real time. Silverchair's tool Composer is a great use case of adapting to ongoing publisher and editorial needs. It's a semi-structured content authoring tool that puts authoring in the hands of the teams, and you're able to create blogs, sponsored content, and news, and have that right alongside first-class objects like journals and articles and be discovered to researchers as well. So that's it for me. Thank you all again.
Thanks so much, Nicole and Kate. I love how we've moved along the whole flow really, and how we moved from author experience, touching on reviewer experience, to end user experience in the end. And it made me think of a question for you, Nicole, to start with. In a previous panel that I've done in Charleston last year, and also at UKSG, I talked about the combined read and publish user experience, trying to combine elements of the publication process for authors with reader experiences, like what content do I want to read? And I wondered if that's something you were already doing at Silverchair, or maybe have looked at. So for example, if you perhaps get reading recommendations based on what you've published, or the other way around, if we can include publishing recommendations based on what you've been reading. Is that something you've looked at, you know?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so in the last year, a lot of what we have been implementing has really been about what the user is consuming and what they might be interested in. But I definitely think as we're looking towards, what AI can do for us that is beneficial, thinking about it from the read and publication perspective, and driving that. So one thing we do that likely can support the publisher here is providing reports based on users and their interests. So publishers are able to see what users are consuming and what their recommendations might be coming back. So it's not just about, what was read, but also what was relevant to what they read. And that could drive and inform, right, what might be relevant to publish. But I think we could definitely enhance and improve how we give that information back and put it in the publisher's hands.
Any thoughts about that, Michael or Kate?
I would just say, yeah, there's a lot of room for the industry to really take advantage of the analytics that are available to us. I think we're just scratching the surface. So yeah, I think the direction that things are going, we'll see interesting changes in the future.
Yeah, I'm quite excited.
I think for me, when I listen to that, I think about the standards again, and I don't just mean identifiers. We talk about the interchanges that happen with an editorial manager or production manager out to different vendors, or ultimately to a platform. They're reliant on using a standard and expected XML between those various tools. And what we tend to find is, I call it the ish. So like it's JADS-ish, or it's Mecca-ish, or it's Bits-ish. And like that tends to limit the amount of where AI or machine learning can reliably, do some of the work that would be looking to do. So I think that for me, it all comes back to, as an industry, agreeing and really sticking to those standards that we're supporting, so that all of our various tools, whether they're here or elsewhere, outside of this panel, can reliably work together, and the machines can learn in a predictable way. So yeah, that was kind of my big takeaway. I was like, that would be wonderful. I think we need stronger and adhered to standards.
So standard is still something of the holy grail that everyone talks about, and some people say they adhere to, but in your experience, not everybody does, right?
Yeah. I'm from my seat, I think that when we think about, or when we talk to editors or publishers about AI, we're not talking with people who are, engineers. I'm certainly not one myself. And it's very easy to look at something. I saw it in the chat GPT. It is very smart. It is farther along than I'm sure anyone expected. But we are not also to where I think people assume, which is that it is near human. It's still predicated on someone, a person, telling it how to learn. And there's inevitably some bias in that, conscious or unconscious. And so there's just a lot that we need to work through still. And so I guess to answer that specific question and elsewhere, I really do love where we're going with AI and, different tooling and automation. We just need to be realistic around what it is that we essentially like set and forget, versus we're iterating, we're learning, kind of making sure that we're staying on track of those things. And standards help with that. It allows us to have known and accepted kind of boundaries of which we're going to work within.
Yeah, I think at the moment I find that AI and Chat GPT seems to be used anonymously, but it's actually, they're very, very different things, right? We use AI in lots of different ways to pull out information in a controlled way, whereas Chat GPT is this engine that searches through a specific set of information. And as we've seen in some, like there was a great post in the Scholarly Kitchen of someone who like looked through the references that ChatGPT gave them for this article, and they were all wrong. Like he went to look up books that didn't actually exist. So I think we just need to do, in my opinion, a lot of education around that and what it is and what it can do and what it isn't. And also, people need to be aware that if they put their article through ChatGPT before they submit it, it's out there somewhere, right? And perhaps you can talk to that a little bit, but if we had like tools and questions in place to guide authors and say, when they submit, please confirm that you haven't done this, so publishers have the kind of assurance that it's not being submitted somewhere, it's not floating around somewhere in the Chat GPT universe, that would perhaps help as well with those dangers.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there's, as much as I said I would love, firm boundaries, I think that it's still a little nebulous for me. I think that there's part of, we'll take a different angle on that, I guess, to answer it. Part of the value of Chat GPT is for people who may be neurodivergent and they need help, doing those kinds of things. And I think that we have a responsibility to leverage those tools to help people like adhere to the standards that we set. So then to not allow them to submit or use Chat GPT in some ways, like what are the boundaries? And I don't have a perfect answer for those things yet. And I think that like the notion to, to ask someone to affirm that they have or have not submitted their content through Chat GPT makes sense from a policy standpoint, but what, bias might be inserted into that for people. And I guess there's just a lot of conversation we need to have and thinking we need to do in that space so that we can have accepted norms. And I'm really heartened by the fact that the STM Integrity Hub is a cross-publisher initiative that everyone's willing to work together on this space. And whether it's with tools around integrity or how to integrate, inevitably with other AI options to vet those spaces, ultimately it's not something that one publisher can solve alone, and it's going to require collaboration in that way. So that's my point of view on kind of where I think that it's a policy changes as well as integration point.
Yeah. And I do agree with you. I think there's lots of really good uses in terms of laying the playing field for, let's say, non-native English speakers. But I think it's one thing to use it for certain elements of what you're writing, or to put the whole thing through it. That's what I meant, as in your finished manuscript.
But what? And I don't have a good answer to it. But what?
No, I think you're right. There's
Would
lots
you
of
consider
conversations
like what
have,
elements? Is it your results you can enter, but not your methods? Or realistically, it'd probably be the opposite. And kind of what's the line, and is it the same for every discipline? There's so many questions that, as someone who works on the software side, I have for publishers. And that's where Nicole actually raised this in our planning sessions, was we really need that collaboration and like the insights of not just one publisher to connect us and have those conversations with various vendors, but like to have a point of view themselves and where that sits within the broader industry.
Yep.
I think
go ahead.
Just on the theme of AI, I think where, coming from the platform perspective, where I would like to see focus on AI is around discoverability and engaging the users. Like that seems like a very straightforward, ethical, safe place to leverage the technology in a really beneficial way. How can we elevate the content in Google and search rankings, leveraging AI in a way that the content, the way it's represented today, may not. How can we boost that without manipulating the content itself? Like that stays the same structure. We're not, creating new abstracts or different types of summaries for the content that are somehow ingested and spit out. But like that seems like a really great starting place. And I love your point, Romy, about AI and ChatGPT. ChatGPT is new, AI is not. When we talk about things like semantic enrichment and driving user recommendations, that is using AI to do that. And we've had that for years.
Yep. I know there are lots of questions that we have prepared that we won't get to, but the one that I'd like to touch on briefly is integration between different tools and platforms, whatever we want to call them, and communication between them. And one of the things we talked about in our planning was, what if you want to set up a new integration, or you want to change platforms, and you have to coordinate that, and you have this kind of three-way relationship between two different vendors and the platforms. What are your recommendations of the best way of going about doing that, for anyone who's listening, perhaps? Do you want to start us off, Michael?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think, integrations are just a part of our life. It's hard to get away from that. I've seen a few journals out there who don't have them, but most of them do. But yeah, whenever you're starting to sort of mix vendors and all together, I mean, we've seen it in a lot of different configurations. I know we've had some where we're not allowed to talk to the other vendor, and it's difficult, and you're really depending on the publisher to play that go-between role. So it can go as well as that publisher person lets it. It's also, I always find it useful when we at J&J get to talk directly to usually it's some technology integration or platform or something, and we get to just exchange the really nitty-gritty information that we need, because I just feel like otherwise just things get missed in this game of telephone. So it's nice whenever we can just talk directly to the integration partner, and give them our perspective, get theirs, and find that ground where we can meet. Oh, and I did want to mention something that I did really find interesting is kind of linking back to my email point. The communication integrations, I think, are a place where we're going to see some interesting things happen, because email's just becoming a disaster, just across the board. So you have things like WeChat integrations now for like the Chinese market. So I'm looking forward to seeing more versions of that that just make communication easier.
Yeah, I think that as someone who tends to be kind of the hub with the product that we have to many different integrations, it can be really hard when you get half of the story about like what the need is, or even what the partner does, or how the partner is expected to engage. And sometimes we're in a situation where we have the like confirmed contractual relationship, and we're working with a vendor who's like going through the sales process. So just having transparency around what that looks like, and what the expected business outcomes are, in addition to the technical outcomes. One tip I guess I would give to publishers as well, and to vendors, is it's so easy to look at like, this is my contractual relationship, this is my engagement, but like a software provider is very different than a service provider, and so the levers of those relationships are different. So having active engagement on all sides, and just like remembering to take the step back. All right, okay, what's the motivator for a J&J, and how can I connect with that and support that, and what's the motivators for the platform to get this up and running? And just, yes, it's important to talk about the technology and the integration points, but if you can figure out how to support each other through those, things, it can actually lead to better working relationships overall, and frankly, longer term relationships between the vendors that then in turn support other publishers longer term. So it all kind of feeds itself. But it can be a little bit difficult to focus on that when you've got, task at hand, here's a sprint, we got to get it done. So yeah, that tends to be where we tend to get heads down and a little bit misaligned.
Yeah, and I guess integrations are different at different points of the workflow. Nicole, you were talking about once you have an integration set up with a vendor, that's it. Whereas in my experience, at least when we talk about like the integrations we've done with the editorial manager, it still needs to be set up for each journal on a journal level, because each journal is a site. So there's a little bit of variety there, I guess. Right, we're seeing people drop off and we're hitting the hour, and I don't like people to stay too long because I know you all got other meetings and busy things to do. Any other last minute thoughts from my speakers here today before we wrap up? Michael,
No, thank you
anything
so
else?
much for the opportunity.
Yeah,
Thank
this has
you.
been fun. Yeah,
Great.
yeah, appreciate it. It's always fun to talk about these topics.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and thank you, the three of you, for joining me today. If you haven't already, please join the Kronos Hub newsletter and also the event list. I'm in the middle of putting together my program of webinars for after the summer. We'll take a break over July and August because everybody's away anyway. So please sign up. I haven't got any new events to announce yet because they're all still in the planning stage, but there's some conference we'll be attending next year. I think I'm now only just recovering from the last one. So I think it's time for a summer break. So thanks very much. Here also everyone's email addresses. If you have any questions for Kate or Michael or Nicole, please feel free to drop them a line, and I'm sure you can find them online as well or on LinkedIn. Oh, please feel free to get in touch with me and I'll pass it along if there's any other questions. But yeah, thank you so much. I've been joined by my dog on the couch today. She's just coming in. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.